"It's just hair," he said, until the girl he targeted made him wish he'd kept his hands to himself. There's a sound you don't expect to hear in a classroom. Scissors. Not the usual kind when someone's working on a poster board or clipping out homework. No, this was different. Quick, sneaky, intentional. Like someone trying to make a mark and get away with it before anyone noticed. 15-year-old Imani Rivers was sitting in the second row, just 2 seats from the window, in room 109 at Oak Ridge High in Toledo, Ohio. It was third period, English. Mr. Halpern was mid-rant about irony in Of Mice and Men, writing something on the board that nobody was paying attention to. Jordan Mercer was 2 rows back and 1 seat to the left. Jordan was the kind of boy who never sat still, always tapping his pencil, always talking over someone else, always looking for a way to make the room laugh, even if it meant making someone else the punchline. He wasn't funny because he was clever. He was funny because people were afraid not to laugh. The kind of fear that comes wrapped in peer pressure and silence. He'd been staring at Imani's hair all period. She was wearing it out that day, thick, full, beautifully coiled. It was the kind of hair that didn't ask for attention, but earned it anyway. Imani sat up straight, shoulders back, focused on her notes, pencil gliding quietly across the page. Jordan leaned forward in his seat. He whispered something to the boy next to him. They both looked at Imani, snickered. Then he pulled the scissors from the front pocket of his hoodie, bright red ones from the art room. He'd taken them earlier that morning. He twirled them once in his fingers, then nodded to the boy beside him like, "Watch this." He stood up like he was stretching, took 2 slow steps forward, and in one swift, ugly motion, snip. He cut a chunk of Imani's hair right off the back. It fell to the floor like it didn't know what had just happened. For a second, no one reacted. Then a few people gasped. Someone let out a half laugh before covering their mouth. A girl at the front turned around, eyes wide. Imani's pencil froze. She reached up and touched the back of her head. Her fingers paused where the hair had been. She turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the floor. That's when she saw it. The coil, lying next to her backpack, like a piece of her had been thrown away. Jordan smirked. "Damn, I didn't think it'd come off that easy." No one laughed. Even his usual crew just looked around nervously. Imani didn't speak. She bent down, picked up the coil, and set it gently on her desk. Her eyes didn't leave it for a moment. Then slowly she stood up. The scrape of her chair against the floor felt louder than Mr. Halpern's chalk. She turned around to face Jordan, and the look on her face? It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. It was something else. Something calm, still, and way too quiet. But that silence? It was louder than anything Jordan had ever heard. Jordan's grin faltered. He tried to play it cool, toss out a quick, "Relax, it's just hair." Like that would undo what he did. Like it would erase the snip. Like Imani was supposed to shrug it off, laugh it off, let it slide. Because girls like her were always expected to let things slide. But Imani's eyes didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring straight at him like she was peeling back layers he didn't know he had. Like she saw past his weak smile, through the false bravado, and right into whatever scared boy was hiding underneath the loud mouth and the just jokes. Mr. Halpern still hadn't noticed. The classroom was dead quiet now. Even the clock ticking above the whiteboard seemed like it was holding its breath. "Yo," Jordan chuckled, scratching his head. "I was just messing around." Imani tilted her head slightly, still no words. She picked up the piece of hair from her desk, held it up between 2 fingers, and looked at it. The whole class watched, frozen. Then she looked at him again. "Does that look like a joke to you?" Her voice was calm, too calm, not trembling, not shaky, just steady. Jordan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Imani's hands were still, but her body? You could feel it, coiled, tight, like a wire pulled back too far. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't crying, but you could see it. This wasn't over. A girl near the window whispered, "Oh my God." A boy 2 rows back muttered, "She about to lose it." But she didn't. She walked right up to Jordan's desk, the piece of hair still in her hand, and placed it on the corner of his desk like she was returning something he'd dropped. "You touched something sacred," she said, quiet but sharp. "And you didn't ask." Then she turned and walked back to her seat, just like that. But the weight of it? You could feel it pressing against every wall in that room. It wasn't what she did, it was what she didn't do. The way she didn't scream. The way she didn't give him the meltdown he was probably hoping for. The way she made everyone realize how wrong it really was. Mr. Halpern finally turned around, still holding a piece of chalk in his hand. "Is everything okay back there?" Nobody answered. Imani sat down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked straight ahead. "Jordan?" the teacher asked. Jordan cleared his throat. "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. Not even close. Because every kid in that room knew something had shifted, and even if they couldn't explain it yet, they all felt it. Like they'd just witnessed the calm before a storm. But the storm didn't come from thunder or yelling. It came from the way Imani carried silence like a weapon. But silence has limits, and Imani's was running out. After third period, the bell rang like normal. Backpacks zipped, desks scraped. The hallway filled with sneakers squeaking against the tile and voices rising above lockers slamming shut. Everyone pretended like the world kept turning, but people kept glancing at Imani. Quick looks, whispers. Some were curious, others embarrassed, a few scared. Imani didn't look at anyone. She walked straight to the bathroom, closed herself in the last stall, and just stood there, not crying, not angry, just still. She looked down at the piece of hair in her hand. She hadn't let it go yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. One text from her mom. "You good? Need a ride?" Imani stared at the message, then typed back, "No, I'm walking to the gym after." Because that's where she needed to be. Her mom, Tasha Rivers, didn't play about her daughter. She didn't believe in raising her soft just because the world was rough. She believed in teaching her how to hit back, not always with fists, but with posture, with voice, with truth. The Rivers boxing gym sat on the corner of Collingwood and Bancroft, across from the gas station with the busted ice machine. It didn't look like much from the outside, just bricks, fading paint, and a flickering neon sign. But inside, it was sweat, discipline, and stories written in bruises and bandages. Imani had been there since she was 7. She could throw a clean jab-cross combo before most kids knew how to do long division. But more than that, she'd learned control. Power wasn't about yelling the loudest. It was knowing when to move and when to make someone regret underestimating you. When Imani pushed open the gym doors after school, the smell of leather gloves and disinfectant hit her like memory. Her mom was in the ring, shouting instructions at 2 teens sparring in headgear. Tasha turned when she saw her, stopped everything. "You all right?" she asked, pulling off her gloves. Imani walked in slow, sat on the bench near the heavy bag, and opened her palm. She didn't say anything, just showed her the coiled hair. Tasha stared at it for a beat, then she sat beside her daughter. "Someone did that on purpose?" Imani nodded once. There was a pause. Then Tasha took the hair from her and held it gently, like it mattered, like it wasn't just hair, but history. "You want to go up there tomorrow and light that kid up?" she asked. Imani gave a half smile, the first one all day. "Nah, that's too easy." Her mom nodded slowly. "You know, people think silence means weakness," she said. "But sometimes silence is a warning, a calm before something they ain't ready for." Imani looked at her. "I didn't even feel angry at first, just stripped. That's because it wasn't just hair. It was yours. He took something without asking, without caring. That ain't just disrespect. That's erasing." Imani sat with that. Her mom stood, then reached for the wraps in her bag. "Go hit the bag. Tighten up your stance. Control your breathing. We'll figure out what comes next." Imani wrapped her hands slowly, deliberately, because something was coming next, and it wouldn't be loud, not at first, but it would be felt. But just because she hadn't exploded yet, didn't mean she wasn't about to. The next morning at Oak Ridge High, things felt weird. Not different enough for the staff to notice, but for the students, yeah, they felt it. That heaviness, that pause in conversation when Imani walked by, that nervous energy trailing behind Jordan Mercer, like he'd finally realized the room wasn't laughing with him anymore. He didn't say much in homeroom, barely looked up from his phone. People were watching him, waiting. Not because they expected him to apologize, but because they wanted to see if he'd act like nothing happened. And that's exactly what he did. Meanwhile, Imani walked into class with her hoodie up, headphones in, and zero interest in small talk. She sat in the back this time, farther away from Jordan. She was different now, not shaken, just steel. Mr. Halpern started class like usual. No mention of what happened, no check-in, nothing. It was like the incident had been wiped off the board, literally and figuratively, but word had already spread across the school, fast. Someone from third period told someone on the track team, who told a girl from student council, who texted a whole group chat. Screenshots, jokes, fake concern, and of course, someone recorded it. A blurry 7-second clip of Jordan making the cut, followed by Imani's cold stare. It landed on Snap, then TikTok, then a private IG story. The caption? He messed with the wrong one. Imani didn't repost it. She didn't even watch it. But she knew what it meant. Her silence was no longer hers alone. At lunch, she was pulled aside by Ms. Vega, the assistant principal. I heard something happened yesterday, Ms. Vega said, ushering her into the office. Would you like to talk about it? Imani raised an eyebrow. He cut my hair in the middle of class. What is there to talk about? Ms. Vega gave a tight smile. I understand, but we need to go through the proper channels, gather all the facts. Imani leaned forward. Was anyone asking for the facts yesterday? Ms. Vega paused. We just want to handle this fairly. Imani didn't respond right away. Then she said, You only came looking when the video started circulating. If there was no clip, no buzz, you'd still be ignoring it. Ms. Vega's face stiffened. That's not true. Then why didn't Mr. Halpern say anything? Why didn't anyone stop class? Why did I have to sit there like I was invisible while he laughed about it? Ms. Vega looked uncomfortable. We're talking to Jordan today. Why not yesterday? No answer. Imani stood. I'm not here to be a headline. I want an apology. I want people to stop acting like my hair's a joke. And I want the same protection y'all give every other girl in this building. Ms. Vega nodded slowly. We'll do our best. Imani turned to the door. You better, she said, because if you don't, I will. And when she walked out, she wasn't angry. She was done waiting for someone else to care. But when the system tries to stay quiet, sometimes the noise has to come from the inside. Friday morning came like a warning. The video had made its rounds. By then, even kids from other schools were commenting on it. Most didn't even know Imani's name. They just knew the girl who didn't flinch. Jordan Mercer was quieter now. Not because he felt bad, but because things weren't funny anymore. People didn't laugh the same when he walked by. Even his boys kept their distance. That fear he used to hide behind, it was bouncing back at him like a mirror. And then there was Imani. Hair pulled back into a tight puff, no hoodie, no headphones, no more hiding. She walked into fourth period English like she was stepping onto a stage she didn't ask for, but now that she was there, she wasn't shrinking. Mr. Halpern was halfway through a grammar lesson when she raised her hand. He looked surprised. Yes, Imani? She stood up. I want to say something. The whole room froze. Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses. Can it wait until... No, she said. It can't. He gave a half nod, stepping back. All right. Imani turned to face the class, every eye on her. She took a breath. Some of you laughed. Some of you looked away. And some of you did nothing, she said. But he cut my hair. On purpose. And nobody said a word. She looked directly at Jordan. You didn't just touch hair. You touched me. You thought it was funny. You thought I'd get mad and scream and act crazy so you could laugh harder. But I didn't. And that messed with you. Jordan shifted in his seat. You didn't break me. You exposed yourself. The class was quiet. Some kids looked down at their desks. One girl, Caden from the track team, nodded softly. I'm not just defending myself, Imani said. I'm defending every girl who's ever had their hair touched without permission, who's been mocked for how they show up, who's been told it's not that serious when someone disrespects their space. Mr. Halpern stepped in. Imani, I'm not done. He raised his hands slightly. Go ahead. She turned back to the room. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for awareness. For y'all to recognize that what happened isn't small. That silence makes you part of it. And that the next time you see something, say something. Because today it was me. She paused. Next time, it could be you. Then she sat back down. Mr. Halpern opened his mouth to speak, but for once, the room didn't need his words. Jordan leaned back in his seat, arms folded across his chest. You done? Imani looked at him. No, but you are. He blinked. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, people finally see you now, and not the version you try to sell. Jordan's face tightened, but he didn't respond. Imani turned her head back to the front, hands folded neatly on her desk. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat. Okay, let's get back to the lesson. But no one was listening, because once someone finds their voice, it's impossible to unhear them. By Monday, the front office couldn't ignore it anymore. Too many phone calls, too many emails. A few parents had even shown up in person asking why nothing had been done about the video, about the boy who cut a black girl's hair, about the teacher who stood frozen like it was someone else's job to care. The principal, Dr. Kearns, finally made an announcement during homeroom. An incident involving 2 students last week is currently under review. We want to remind everyone that Oak Ridge High takes all reports of harassment seriously. It was vague, carefully worded, sanitized. Imani heard it over the loudspeaker in first period and rolled her eyes. Under review meant stall until the heat dies down. It meant do the bare minimum and hope she stops asking questions. But she wasn't built like that. After school, she met with her mom and a small group of students who'd pulled together over the weekend. They weren't activists, just kids who were tired of being quiet. They printed flyers, they emailed teachers, they posted messages online, not for attention, but for accountability. On Wednesday morning, students walked into school wearing all black. Not a protest exactly, just a message, a visual. We see what happened. We're not cool with it. We're not going to pretend it's over. Some teachers said nothing, others gave side eyes or told them to change into something more appropriate. But by lunchtime, more than 100 students were dressed in black. Jordan walked through the halls and barely anyone looked at him, not even to whisper. It was like he'd been erased from the very world he used to control. He saw Imani by the lockers, calm, talking to a few girls. She looked stronger, not just because people were finally standing beside her, but because she'd never needed the crowd. Her strength had always been real, even when it was quiet. Later that day, he was pulled from class and told he'd be facing a suspension. He told them it was a joke, that he didn't mean it, that people were taking it too far. But it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't in control of the story. She was. That afternoon, Imani sat in her mom's office at the gym, staring at the small mirror on the wall. She pulled off her puff. The uneven patch in the back was still there. The scissors had done real damage. She reached for a brush, paused, then set it down. Her mom walked in. You ready? Imani nodded. Yeah. They didn't talk much on the drive. The radio played something soft in the background, but her mind was somewhere else, thinking about how something as simple as hair could carry so much. Not just style, but history, identity, pride, pain, all of it. At the salon, she sat quietly as the stylist examined the damage. We can shape it into something fresh, the woman said. You'll still look like you. Imani smiled. I never stopped. That night, she posted a photo. Her new cut was tight, sharp, clean. The caption, "This is bigger than hair." And under it, hundreds of comments, some from people she didn't even know. But the ones that mattered came from girls who looked like her, who'd felt the sting of hands in their hair without permission, who'd been told their crown was too much, too wild, too different. They thanked her for not breaking. She didn't do it for likes, or praise, or revenge. She did it because staying quiet was never an option. She did it so the next girl wouldn't have to, because some stories don't end when the noise dies down. They end when the lesson is heard. If you've ever seen someone get disrespected and stayed quiet, ask yourself why. If you've ever laughed at something that wasn't funny, ask yourself who paid the price. And if someone ever tries to shrink you, cut you down, or silence your voice, remember Imani Rivers. Remember that calm doesn't mean weak, and that the real fight isn't always loud. Stand up, speak up, respect the crown.